It was Christmas morning, the kind that should be filled with laughter and warmth. But instead, the air in my home was thick with tension. I remember the sound of the tree lights flickering and the smell of cinnamon and pine mingling with a cold unease that I could not shake. He smiled at me, a smile that never reached his eyes, and I knew something was wrong. But I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe in the magic of the season. I had no idea that the man I loved, the man I trusted with every part of my life, had planned to turn this day into my worst nightmare. I was making coffee in the kitchen, trying to enjoy the soft hum of holiday music, when I felt his hands on my shoulders, a forceful push that sent me over the edge of the balcony. The world spun around me as the cold wind slapped my face and the ground rushed up to meet me. I screamed, and for a moment, I thought this was the end, that the story of my life would be cut short in a cruel twist of fate. But somehow, I survived the fall. The world around me blurred and I felt pain radiating through my body, and yet there was a spark inside me, a fierce determination that refused to let him win. I clawed my way back to consciousness, feeling betrayed by the person I had once called my husband, the one who had whispered words of love in my ear and held me close in the night. I was consumed by a whirlwind of fear, anger, and disbelief. I realized that my survival was not just a miracle, it was an opportunity, a chance to expose the darkness behind the mask. I had seen the smiles, the cheerful greetings to friends and neighbors, but behind closed doors, there was a monster hiding in plain sight. I spent weeks recovering in the hospital. The pain was physical and emotional. My body was battered, but my spirit was rebuilding itself stronger than ever. I remembered the way he had laughed after he pushed me, as if he had won a cruel game, and I knew I had to gather the courage to fight back. I began documenting everything: the lies, the manipulation, the subtle threats, and the overt violence. I collected evidence, quietly, talking to friends and family who had also noticed the signs but had been afraid to speak out. I realized I was not alone. Many women suffer in silence, and my story could give them hope and strength. I felt a deep connection with the women whose voices had been silenced by fear, and I knew I had a responsibility to be their voice, to show the world that survival is possible and that evil cannot remain hidden forever. The night I first confronted him in court, the memories of that Christmas morning came flooding back. The fear, the betrayal, the moment when my life hung in the balance. But I also remembered the fire inside me that refused to die. I spoke with clarity and emotion, recounting every detail of that day, every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to make me doubt my instincts. I could see the shock in his eyes, the realization that his plan had failed, that the woman he tried to destroy had risen from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever. The media covered the trial with fascination, but for me, it was never about attention. It was about truth, about justice, about reclaiming the life that was almost stolen from me. I visited the balcony again months later, standing there with trembling hands and a heart full of resolve. I let the wind wash over me, and I whispered to myself that I had survived, that I was no longer a victim, but a warrior, that my voice would be louder than his actions ever were. I connected with survivors online, sharing my journey, my pain, and my triumph. The messages of support and solidarity reminded me that darkness exists, but so does light, that trauma can be transformed into strength, that fear can be turned into courage. I wanted every woman who had felt powerless to know that they are not alone, that survival is not just a chance, it is a declaration that evil cannot define their lives. I realized that the true miracle was not just surviving the fall, but reclaiming my power, standing tall, despite the scars and the memories. I built a life beyond the shadow of fear, traveling, helping other survivors, speaking at events, showing that healing is possible, that courage is contagious, that life after trauma can be full of hope and love. I never looked back. I never let the fear take root. Instead, I cultivated gratitude for the people who stood by me, for the small victories, for the moments of joy that were harder earned but far more precious. I learned to trust again, not blindly, but with wisdom, to love with caution, but with openness, to live fully even in the aftermath of darkness. The memory of that Christmas morning never fades, but it no longer controls me. It is a reminder of resilience, a testament to the strength that exists within all of us when faced with the unimaginable, that sometimes survival is just the beginning, that exposure of truth is a weapon more powerful than any act of violence, and that the human spirit can rise above betrayal, above pain, above fear, to become something greater, something unbreakable. And I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life, knowing that I survived, not just to tell my story, but to inspire others to find their strength, their voice, and their courage in the face of darkness. I took my first steps back into the world cautiously. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow heavier. I remembered the way his hands had gripped me, the cold laughter in his eyes. And yet, with every step, I felt the fire inside me growing stronger. Each morning, I woke up determined to take back the life that had been stolen from me. I refused to let fear dictate my days. I started writing down everything, not just the details of that Christmas morning, but the subtle moments that had built up the storm, the quiet manipulations, the lies hidden in kindness, the way he twisted my love into control. I wrote them all down so that I could see them clearly, so that I could understand that I had not imagined the terror that I had endured. And with every word on paper, I felt lighter. I realized that truth is not just spoken, it is recorded, it is remembered, it is carried forward. I began speaking to lawyers, friends, and professionals, learning how to protect myself, how to confront him legally and emotionally, how to turn the nightmare into justice. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. I remembered the first time I saw him after the fall, the anger that flashed in his eyes, the disbelief that I was still here, that I had survived, that he had failed to break me. And in that moment, I understood that his power was never real. It was only the illusion he had created for himself. I started sharing my story with others, quietly at first, with friends and family, then with support groups, then online, with women all over the world who had been silenced by fear. I could feel their pain and their courage blending with my own, and it gave me strength. I realized that every scar is a story, every tear a testament to survival, every heartbeat a victory. I immersed myself in healing, learning to love my body again, to trust my mind again, to find peace in the spaces that had once felt dangerous. I traveled alone at first, feeling the wind against my face and the sun on my skin, reminding me that life was mine to reclaim, that the world was not against me, but waiting for me to step forward. I spoke at events, sharing my journey. The moment I spoke in front of strangers and saw tears in their eyes, I understood that survival is contagious, that hope can spread like wildfire, that one story can ignite thousands of hearts. I met other survivors, their faces reflecting pain and resilience, their voices soft yet strong, and in their stories I saw reflections of my own. Together we built a network, a circle of warriors bound not by fear, but by the determination to live fully, to speak boldly, to love without apology. I returned to that balcony months later, standing there in the quiet early morning light, remembering the fall, remembering the fear, but also feeling a surge of triumph. I placed my hand on the railing and closed my eyes and whispered that I was free, that the chains of terror were broken, that I was no longer a victim, but a voice, a force, a living proof that darkness cannot contain light. I dedicated myself to helping others, to ensuring that no one else had to suffer in silence, that every woman who had felt powerless could know that survival is not just possible, it is inevitable if you refuse to give up. I started workshops, mentoring women, guiding them to recognize the signs of manipulation and abuse, to understand that they are stronger than they believe, that they deserve safety and respect, that their lives are worth fighting for. I wrote letters to survivors around the world, sharing hope and strategies, sharing love and encouragement. I met families who had witnessed the aftermath of abuse, and together we learned to rebuild trust, to create spaces of safety and warmth. I returned to the courtroom again and again, not for revenge, but for closure, for justice, for the record to show that survival is a declaration, not a crime, that truth cannot be hidden forever, that evil has a face, but courage has a soul. I traveled to places I had dreamed of seeing, places that had seemed impossible when fear had ruled my life. And every step reminded me that life is vast and beautiful, and that my spirit was capable of more than I had ever imagined. I remembered the day I danced alone in the living room of my new apartment, the music washing over me, and I realized that joy is not the absence of pain, but the triumph over it. That laughter is not denial, but reclamation. That life after trauma can be richer, deeper, and more meaningful than any ordinary existence. I continue to document every day of my journey, the small victories, the moments of fear overcome, the connections made, the hearts touched. And every night, I read my own words to remind myself that I am alive, that I am strong, that I am free. And in that reflection, I understood that my story is not just mine, but a beacon for anyone who has ever been told they are powerless, anyone who has been silenced, anyone who has been pushed to the edge. I survived to expose him, but more importantly, I survived to show the world that survival is only the beginning, that courage is contagious, that healing is possible, that life can be reclaimed and transformed into something beautiful, something unstoppable, something eternal. I began to understand that survival is not simply the act of living, it is the decision to rise again each morning, to face the world with open eyes and an unbroken heart. I remember the first time I went back into a crowded room after months of isolation, the laughter of strangers mingling with my own quiet heartbeat, the smell of coffee and pastries, and the soft hum of conversation filling me with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Every step I took reminded me of the fall, the push, the betrayal. But it also reminded me that I had reclaimed my life, that I was no longer defined by his actions. I started noticing the small details, the sunlight reflecting on the walls, the warmth of a stranger's smile, the gentle brush of wind against my face, and I realized that the world was full of moments like this, moments that had been invisible when fear had clouded my mind, moments that now felt like gifts, moments that I would never take for granted. I began speaking to women in shelters, in their homes, online, through calls and messages, sharing the story of my Christmas morning, the fall, the survival, and the ongoing fight for justice. I told them that fear is temporary, that courage is lasting, that the moment we choose to stand, we choose life. I watched as their eyes filled with tears and determination, as their voices trembled with hope and gratitude. And I felt a wave of connection so powerful that it made the pain of the past feel distant, like a shadow fading behind me. I confronted my husband one last time in court, the air thick with tension and silence. And as I recounted the details of that day, the fear, the betrayal, the fall, I saw the shock in his eyes, the realization that his power over me was gone forever, that the woman he had tried to destroy was standing taller and stronger than ever. I spoke of my recovery, of my journey, of helping others, of building a life that could not be broken. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of closure, knowing that justice was not only in the legal system, but in the reclamation of my spirit. I traveled to the places I had dreamed of seeing, standing at cliffs and beaches, mountains and forests, feeling the wind lift me up, reminding me of the fall and yet of the rise, of the unstoppable force within me. Every adventure, every step of the journey became a testament to the power of resilience and the strength of the human spirit. I began writing a book chronicling every detail of my experience, not for fame, but for legacy, to ensure that anyone who had been silenced could find their voice, and anyone who had been pushed to the edge could find hope. I spoke at conferences and events, sharing my story with thousands, the stories of survival blending together, creating a tapestry of strength, courage, and empowerment. I realized that pain can be transformed into purpose, that trauma can be reshaped into power, that fear can be turned into fuel, and that life after darkness can be brighter, deeper, and more profound than I had ever imagined. I dedicated myself to advocacy, helping survivors understand that their experiences are valid, that their voices matter, that their lives are worth every ounce of effort to protect, to nurture, and to cherish. I returned to that balcony where it had all begun, standing there alone in the quiet night, the city lights twinkling below, the stars overhead. I closed my eyes and felt the memory of the fall, not as terror, but as a catalyst. The moment when I had been given a choice, and I chose survival. I whispered a vow to myself, to continue helping others, to continue living fully, to continue speaking boldly, to continue embracing life with every heartbeat, every breath, every step. I realized that survival was never just about me. It was about every person who had felt powerless, every soul who had been silenced, every heart who had been broken. And in that realization, I understood that my story was only beginning, that the strength I had found within myself was infinite, that the love I had reclaimed for myself and the world was endless, and that life, even after betrayal, even after pain, even after the fall, could be a canvas for courage, hope, and unshakable joy. And as I walked away from that balcony, the wind brushing against my face, I knew that nothing could ever take my power, my voice, or my spirit again. That I had survived to live, to fight, to inspire, and to love. That I had survived not just to expose the darkness, but to light the way for everyone who had ever feared that darkness would win. And in that light, I found freedom, courage, and peace. I felt the warmth of the sun on my face and the cool breeze against my skin. And I knew that I had survived, not just the fall, not just the betrayal, not just the darkness that had tried to claim me, but that I had survived myself. I had faced the terror of that Christmas morning, the moment when life had hung by a fragile thread, and I had chosen to fight, to rise, to reclaim every piece of my spirit. I walked through the city streets, noticing the laughter of children, the soft murmur of conversations, the everyday beauty that I had once overlooked. And I realized that life is full of small miracles, moments that remind us that the world is alive and waiting for us to step fully into it. I visited the women I had met on my journey, hearing their stories, their triumphs, their tears, and I felt a deep connection, knowing that our strength is magnified when shared, that survival is not solitary, that courage multiplies, that hope spreads like wildfire. And I dedicated myself to helping others, to guiding them to reclaim their voices, their power, their lives. I spoke to crowds, sharing my story, the fall, the betrayal, the survival, the rise. And I watched as faces transformed, as tears flowed, as hearts lifted, and I understood that my purpose was greater than I had ever imagined, that my journey was never just mine, that it belonged to every person who had been silenced, who had been hurt, who had been pushed to the edge. And I felt gratitude for my own resilience, for the people who had supported me, for the moments of pain that had taught me strength, for the life that had been given back to me. In every heartbeat, every breath, every step, I returned one last time to the balcony where it had all begun. Standing there in the quiet night, looking out over the city lights, the stars twinkling above, the memory of the fall present but no longer terrifying. And I whispered to myself that I had survived, that I was unbreakable, that my voice would never be silenced, that my spirit would never be defeated, that the darkness that had tried to claim me had only made me stronger. And in that whisper, I felt the infinite power of survival, of courage, of hope. I felt the connection to every survivor, every person who had ever been told they are powerless. And I knew that my story was a beacon, a guide, a light shining through the shadows, showing that life after darkness can be brighter, deeper, more meaningful, and more beautiful than anyone could ever imagine. I walked away from the balcony with my head held high, my heart full of determination and love, knowing that I had survived not just to expose the darkness, not just to reclaim my life, but to inspire others, to rise, to fight, to live fully and to embrace every moment of the extraordinary life that is waiting for them. And as I stepped into the world, I carried with me the knowledge that survival is only the beginning, that courage is infinite, that hope never dies, and that the human spirit, no matter how battered, how broken, how terrified, can rise above anything and become something beautiful, unstoppable, eternal. And I knew that my journey would continue, that my voice would continue to echo, that my story would continue to inspire, that life, even after betrayal, even after pain, even after the darkest night, can be a testament to love, resilience, courage, and unshakable hope.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every single subscription motivates me to bring you even more exciting and dramatic HOA stories. And don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. I'll see you in the next story, where justice gets even more satisfying.